Hello and welcome to Holiday Beard. This week on Holiday Beard, it's back to Monteverdi, who also had a beard. Now, which piece of his are these three Fagiolini talking about?
What a piece. It just gets me every time.
This piece always comes up when we're talking about our favourite Monteverdi madrigal. It's just got the most incredible harmonies, and it's the perfect expression of love and loss in miniature form.
Aside from it being the slow burn of all slow burns, and it makes you cry, it has that bit where he restrikes the dissonance and your insides go all funny. Oh! This was the first piece I ever sang with E. Fagiolini. I grew up a Taliesin bird geek, and I'm still a Taliesin bird geek, but this one piece made me think of Renaissance music in a completely different way. Passionate and human and red-blooded stuff.
They're talking about Rimanti in pace, which, as Greg says, we'll be singing at our Live from London concert on August the 8th in a programme called Monteverdi, The Ache of Love. These weekly Saturday evening streamed live events kick off with Voces 8, who are hosting the whole series, moving on to the Swingle Singers, the 16, Chanticleer, live from San Francisco, that one, Gesualdo 6, Stile Antico, Academy of Ancient Music, and us, a breathtaking achievement really to have got all this together in the time. And an £80 ticket buys you all 10 concerts, amazing value. Just email us at london@efagiolini.com and we'll take your money and give you the code. By 1592, Monteverdi had been at the Mantuan court for 3 years. He was now about 25 years old. He'd arrived in Mantua in 1590 as a string player, according to him, but the payment records show he was first paid for his singing. 25 he may have been, but this was already his third full book of five-voice madrigals. He wrote 6 in the end. And he was now writing for the expert one-to-a part ensemble at the Mantuan court that performed for the Duke, perhaps at the Friday evening concerts in the Hall of Mirrors, a room rediscovered in the palace by Paolo Besutti some 20 years ago, and now renovated. This Mantuan group was set up by the Duke of Gonzaga, in direct imitation of the supergroup that he'd heard in nearby Ferrara back in the 1580s. Professional women singers singing difficult repertoire, singers so good that they changed the musical style of the composer Jacques de Wert, who was sort of Monteverdi's boss, when he heard them in early 1581. Some years after the event, their singing was described by a witness.
They moderated or increased their voices, loud or soft, heavy or light, according to the demands of the piece. They sang long passages legato or detached, sometimes with leaps, other times with long trills, again with sweet running passages sung softly. They accompanied both music and the sentiment with appropriate facial expressions, looks and gestures, with no awkward movements of the mouth or hands or body that didn't express the feeling of the song.
This tells us quite a bit about their priorities as singers and listeners, doesn't it? Let's look at the poem, which is by the priest Angelo Grillo, who, when writing erotic poetry, used the pseudonym Livio Celiano. "Remain in peace," said Thyrsis, sighing to the sorrowing and fair Phyllis. "Remain, I shall go. That was prescribed to me by law, cruel fate and bitter, perverse destiny." And she, now from one and the other eye dripping bitter tears, fixed her eyes on the eyes of her Thyrsis and pierced his heart with the most pitying arrows. Whence he, with death imprinted on his face, said, "Alas, how can I go without my son, from torment to torment, from pain to pain?" And she, oppressed with sighs and tears, faintly uttered these words, "Ah, my dear soul, who takes you from me?" Now, I don't do literary criticism, but not much is actually happening here, is it? It's basically,
You stay here, I'll have to leave. But how can I live without you?
Why are you going away?
does it matter that not very much seems to happen in the piece? Well, text always matters, but what I think helps more here is to think about the setup. Two people in love, but conflicted because he has to go but he doesn't want to. And it's this sense of unease or lack of resolution that Monteverdi's music brilliantly creates.
That's very convincing, but I'm not sure it actually means anything. Can you show your workings?
Yes, Professor. Here's how he does it then. Tension in conventional Western harmony is partly based around expectation. If you're in D minorish, as this piece is, and you move to the chord based on the 5th note of the scale, chord 5, then there's a strong expectation that the music has to resolve back to the opening chord. There's a presumably apocryphal story that illustrates this about the composer Ivor Novello going to bed one evening, but hearing someone on the piano downstairs playing something and ending on such a chord, and the sense of it being unresolved was so strong that Novello had to go downstairs, play the chord that should have resolved it, before he could go back upstairs and finally drop off to sleep. So moving to chord 5 is the musical equivalent of raising your voice at the end of a sentence. It demands resolution. Now Monteverdi knows this and does a clever thing. Rimanti's 2 sections begin and end in D, but actually they quickly modulate down a 5th to G. And then pretend that G is the tonal centre or the key of the piece. And that means that when it does come back up the 5th to D to end each section, which you have to do, beginnings and ends of pieces at this period have to be in the same starting and ending key, it feels as if it's moved to that question in chord 5. Very unsettling. So it's both theoretically correct, starting and finishing on D, but also has that unresolved feel of appearing to finish on chord 5. Monteverdi literally has his cake and eats it. The other thing in Rimanti that creates this very unsettled feeling, despite the slow-moving nature of the piece, is that it dips in and out of other keys as if key changing is going out of fashion. So starting on that D, then to G, back to D, E flat, B flat, and to F, D, G, C, A flat, back to D and then G, B flat again, another A flat, before the final. So despite this calm surface, underneath there's trouble. Let's have a look at a few of the coloristic things he does along the way. The opening starts remain in peace, so the leading part remains on its 2nd note. And the other voices remain on their 2nd chord. We hear Phillida weeping in the top 2 voices. The lower trio copies that, but with that harmonic twist. Sospirando means sighs. There's a rest in the middle of the word, to sigh on. Before back to Rimanti again, now on that G, a 5th below the opening. Next it's Io me ne vo, I shall go. And this is sung by the upper voices in a much higher register than the rest of the piece we've heard so far. And it's declaimed, it's not a tune, it's a statement. Tirsi rails against his cruel fate, empio fato, aspra sorte. And it's all off the beat. Empio fato, aspra sor. The harsh, syncopated blows of fate, showing how he's up against it. Now Monteverdi has his little joke here. In music of this and later periods, it's considered awfully bad form to have 2 of the voice parts moving together in parallel perfect fifths. That sort of thing. But Monteverdi does exactly that here on the word empio in 2 of the parts. Monteverdi writing parallel fifths?
Sir, I write to protest in the strongest possible terms about the unconscionable use of parallel  5/5 in this composition.
calm down. It's just Monteverdi's little joke. Because the word that those fifths appear over is empio, the word evil. And as it would be evil to write consecutive fifths in music normally, it's just a little bit of word painting. Ha 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 ha.
Oh, so funny.
The syncopations or cross rhythms on that phrase are actually quite tricky. And you'll note that we've left the original look of the notation here. So not how they'd be expressed in a modern score, crotchets tied across the bar line, but minims, the blows of fate. I like the look of this on the page, and there are other benefits. It tidies up the score, it means there are fewer actual blobs on the page to read. And it can also draw attention to moments of word painting that are lost in modernised notation, like that occhi that we had right back in episode 2, the two semibreves coming out of the page looking at you as two eyes. Well, that wouldn't work if each of them was a minim tied to another minim, but it won't be to everyone's taste. If you want a score of this piece, by the way, email us and I can send it through with minims or with tired crotchets. See how I bend to your every whim for money. Then Phillida speaks, and to colour her speech differently, Monteverdi takes us into flat keys, a different sound world. And from her eyes she distills, stilando, bitter moisture, amaro umore, which trails down her cheek. Tears, lagrime, were a real thing for the writer, Celiano. And you can follow the path of the tears down her cheek in the chromatic line. Stilando amaro umore, which is then mirrored in the other parts. One tear flowing into the next. Until she fixes him with a look. The music fixed on an F major chord. And it's a look that pierces his heart. That B flat against the A, really piercing and biting. In the second half, Tiersi goes deathly pale. So Monteverdi takes us into the depths of flat keys symbolising death, still starting on D, of course, but arriving a few bars later on A flat major. That's a very long way away for this morte, death. Tricky passage to sing in tune, this, and a really useful rule of thumb is keep the flats high. The flats in this music are really sitting at the top of a minor third. The tenor E flat is at the top of a minor third to C, and minor thirds we need to keep wider than they are on the piano to get them acoustically pure. They're flawed on the piano, we know that. So we keep them wide and the flats therefore up rather than pushing the C down low. So onde di mo sings the tenor really high, and then as the bass goes down, bom, bom, bom. We keep the bass also high, moving with very small tones between the C and A flat.
Counterintuitive.
Then we've another outburst by the upper voices as we had in the first half. Again, no recognisable melody, but a cry from the heart. How do you sing a phrase like that on your own in a 1-2 part group? So I asked Nicholas Mulroy, who is SingTheScore's cricket commentator, but also the alto or high tenor on the recording you're going to sing along to, what goes through his mind when he sees a phrase like this?
Well, I think like any ensemble, particularly, it's chamber music we're talking about, isn't it? So you try to balance a really subjective approach to the words, which are, I think, extreme. You're talking about how you can possibly go on without this person, senza mio sole, without my son. So there's obviously an emotional extremity to that, which you have to balance and hold in balance with with the clarity of the harmony and with the allowing the trio really to speak as clearly as it can.
There's a certain tension, though, isn't there, in the words themselves, but also with a tenor, even a light Renaissance high tenor up there at the top of their range, and two falsettists above, and then the baritone comes in on an E flat. I'm assuming that singing at that part of the range is going to bring some tension in, and that's what he wants in obviously a good technical, beautifully set up way.
Yeah, I think that's right, and also the kind of punctuation of the poem is that, you know, he said, and then you almost hear the kind of the opening of the inverted commas to say so there is something very direct and I think unadulterated really about how he asks you to sing it, I think.
Nicholas Mulroy. And that outburst continues at the top of the texture with pain and lamenting, martir and doglie, until the climax on doglie, the tears and the pain are quite visible in the quavers pouring downwards. Finally, it's her turn to speak again, this time oppressed with singhiozzi, sighs, and pianti, tears. Listen to how the harmony weeps on pianti. Now that is one of the most peculiar and unprecedented moments of dissonance that I know in music of this period. If you set up a suspension like this, as it does, then that note will resolve down to there. But in this moment, that note stays where it is and pushes the note above it, which isn't the dissonant note, it's the consonant note, out and up until it gets its own way.
Unprecedented.
This leads into, and she weakly utters these words, fievolmente, meaning weakly, and its chord is built on the weakest note of the scale imaginable, A flat of the G we're supposedly in. At the start, I mentioned how the piece is in D, but how it hangs around in glass of G major, a fifth below. And the pièce de résistance of this is right at the end, the very last phrase, when still in G, the final question is asked. Chi mi ti toglie? Who takes you from me? So to give the sense of asking that question in music, as we've already said, you can move to chord 5. Who takes you from me? But then surely we'd have to resolve into G to finish. But no, because remember, he's only been hiding in G. Actually, theoretically, the piece is in D. It starts and ends in D. So to come back to D like that, both gives you the sense of a question and is theoretically correct. Cake, eat it. It's like that bit in Around the World in 80 Days, where Phileas Fogg has got back to London one day too late to win the bet, until he realised that during his journey he crossed the international date line and he's actually a day ahead of the game and still wins.
Infatti, signore. Eccomi qua. Spero di non avervi fatto aspettare.
Salve, Fogg. Salve, Fogg. Salve, Fogg.
Or maybe not. I've been getting a bit of correspondence as the series has gone along. Thanks very much for sending these in. I really enjoy reading them. I've also been talking to National Youth Choir this week on their virtual summer course. Welcome to any of you watching today. And a lot of the questions seem to start with, can you or should we, can you sing this with just male voices, or should you transpose it up a tone, or do we use vibrato? What sort of voice is suitable for this repertoire? Well, one easy one, on vibrato, do go and have a listen to the current choral chihuahua, Harry Christopher, Eamon Dugan and me, talking about vibrato in our 6th choral chihuahua episode. It's called The V Word. So have a listen to that one. On other points, can I just stress, you can do what you damn well please to this music in the privacy of your own home. Anything that helps you get to grips with it and try to understand it a bit more. Of course, learning about issues of historical concern can help us find a way into the music, but that shouldn't stop us performing it. The middle voice of this piece is marked alto. Alto at this time means, as we've said, a high tenor voice. But if you haven't got a high tenor that can sing this line, it doesn't mean you shouldn't perform it. When Nicholas sings this, it affects the balance to have a tenor on it, and that is very, very useful. It tells us a little bit about how you can sing it. But when Nicholas isn't free, I sing the middle part because I still have something to bring to the line. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it without the exact voices. This music should absolutely be performed by specialists, but also by everyone else as well. Yes, Monteverdi wrote these pieces for the specialist group at the Mantuan court, but he also published them commercially. And, he wasn't going to be ringing up Amadino in Venice to say, well, only sell it to him if he has the right voice, or, I'm not sure, don't sell it to him if he comes from Hamburg because they haven't got the same pitch level as we have around here. A bit of understanding is great, but use your own musical judgment. By all means, perform it with a large choir, lots of voices to a part, or on 5 clarinets if it helps you engage with the music. But if you want to think about something that really did matter to people at the time, how about enunciation of the text? That's something that Monteverdi refers to as much as anything else in his letters when he's talking about singers. And another crucial one is taking the trouble really to understand the text. So if you want a bit of authenticity of spirit as opposed to the letter, pop to the very end of this episode after the credits, and we've put a little section in where the poem's up and I go through the pronunciation and we just look at the poem a little bit more. Sorry for the sermon. That's it. Thanks for watching. Do please remember to pay a little something for these episodes over at ifagilini.com/friends. And if you're still watching now, episode 17, then you should surely have actually joined the friends themselves. Come on in, the water's lovely. Or if you choose not to join...
Dudes, oh my god, join the Fagellini Friends or die horribly like in a Bond film. But also, sing this piece, which I may already have said is extremely cool. You can really let yourself go and get better and better at it the more you sing it, and that way you'll start to understand why in I Fagellini we think that this is a completely brilliant piece, and why we'll be finishing our Live from London concert with it on August the 8th.
Allah
Hello and welcome to Après Sing the Score by the fireside, where we're just burning small furry animals to keep us warm. Right, here we go then on Rimanti in pace, this lovely sonnet by Livio Celiano. Rimanti in pace, alla dolente bella filida, tirsi, sospirando, disse. Let's read that through. Remain in peace, rimanti in pace, to the weeping and beautiful Philida, Tirsi, sighing, says. That's the syntax of it. Let's say that together. Rimanti in pace, alla dolente bella Philida, Tirsi, sospirando, disse. And then he carries on the speech. Rimanti, io me ne vo, I shall go. Tal mi prescrisse legge, empio fato, aspra sorte rubella. So remain, I shall go. That was forced on me by law, legge, and then cruel fate, empio fato, aspra sorte rubella. A bitter perverse destiny, or bitter destiny and perverse rubella. Now she speaks, ed ella, ora dall'una e l'altra stella, and now from one and the other star here meaning eye, stilando amaro umore, distilling bitter tears, i lumi affisse nei lumi del suo tirsi, her lights, her eyes fixed on the lights of her tirsi. And to him she pierced his heart, e gli trafisse il cor di pietosissime quadrella, of the most pitying arrows. Let's read that passage through together. Ed ella, all together now, just the two of us. Ed ella, ora dall'una e l'altra stella, stillando amare umore, i lumi affisse nei lumi del suo tirsi, e gli trafisse il cor di pietosissima quadrella. So those are the two quatrains of the sonnet, the two 4-line sections at the beginning, and then the two 3-line sections which in a sonnet sort of bring clarity to what's happened. Onde, whence he, di morte la sua faccia impressa, disse, whence he with death on his face imprinted, impressed, said, I, come ne andrò, how shall I go, senza il mio sole, without my sun, di martir in martir, di doglie in doglie, from torment to torment, martyrdom to martyrdom, to pain to pain. Ed ella, and she now, oppressa da singhiozzi e piante, pressed, weighed down with sighs and tears, da singhiozzi e pianti, fievolmente formò queste parole, weakly formed these words. There, cara anima mia, chi mi ti toglie? Ah, my beloved, who takes you from me? My friend Sylvia Reseghetti, she tells me that Livio Celiano wrote this when he was around about 30, and he was having to move from place to place, and she wonders whether it's some sort of platonic love. He was a monk, I think, and having to move on from place to place, finding that very difficult. Who knows? But of course the poem stands on its own. So there you are. That was our first Après Sing the Score. Cheers.